right? So last session we discussed about working with custom events. So how do we deal with the custom events, creating a custom component and the configuring event for that component. So defining the event. So as I already told you that events, custom event can be configured with any type of value. You can return any type of value. You can send any type of value. So usually when you are defining the events, event emitter is responsible for emitting the value. So as we already discussed that, so event emitter, you can see this is event emitter. Go to the definition of event emitter. You can see, so event emitter is an interface. You can see event emitter is an interface. And this event emitter interface is a generic type. And it is extending some subject base. Subject is also a generic type, and it says that it is a type of observable. Observable means already I told you, event uses an observer concept. Event follows an observer concept. So sender, subscriber, it uses an observer. So actually it is the background of its library, how it is built actually. So we will not go that much in depth about the architecture of that library. That's not required also, but you need to know. So because already definition I given you, that it, what is observer, what is subscriber, what is sender. So event emitter is a generic type. Event emitter is a generic type. So obviously we know that, so if it is a generic type, so then we obviously know that it can emit any kind of value. Emit different types of values. So for example, suppose we are configuring any control, like suppose just roughly here in the filter component. So I am creating, let's go to the filter component HTML. In the filter component, just I am defining another heading. So event demo. And I am adding a button control here. I am adding a button. And this button, so have some click. Okay. So this click have to perform some specific functionality. So let's go to the filter component. So here I am writing on button click. On button click. So I want it to handle a specific functionality. On button click should fire up when user clicks this button. That means we are using click. On click, that is so on button click. On button click. Now we need to create a custom event here. So already some event is there. So here we are defining another output. And this is button clicked, button clicked. So just one custom event I am defining. And this is using event emitter, event emitter. And here event emitter, it can emit any kind of value. It's a generic type, as I told you that it is generic type. Generic type means it can use a custom also, custom type also. Event emitter can use a custom type. Generic types already we discussed, if you remember. So it can be a string, it can be a number, it can be a boolean, or it can be any specific custom type, custom type. So that means, so we are configuring here, so event emitter, suppose as a number type, emitter as a number type, and new event emitter, and this is emitting the number type of value, That means now this can emit a number, a numeric value. Suppose we have a property. So a button size, something like this. And it is having some number. And we want to emit this value. Then obviously what we can do is we can just access, so this dot, so button, this dot, button clicked should emit, and it should emit a number. So that means it emits a numerical value. This dot button size, it emits that number. And we can access that and use it. So event emitter can emit any kind of value. So I said that it can use a custom type. That means if you want multiple properties to send, generally in JavaScript events you can see JavaScript events have multiple types. For example, JavaScript events have, suppose, key up, so on key up. For that we can have multiple properties like key code, like char code, like shift key, like control key, so like alt key, like which. All these are the properties of that event. So event can contain multiple properties. So just like you remembered, we used mouse. So on mouse move is an event which have client X, we have client Y, we have like screen X, so screen Y, so many options are there. So there can be multiple properties also. In that case, actually, it can be a custom type. I will show you. For example, suppose I am not using this button size. I am not emitting the button size. So here, I will go to our project location. So let's compile this here. So ng-serve project is equal to Amazon. Okay. Now in this project, I will go to the library here. You see, so we have the components library in app. In the app folder, I will maintain another folder. I will give the name as contracts. So already we learned in TypeScript, contracts are nothing but interfaces. So we will create a new contract. We are creating a new contract. And the contract is something like I category. That is the contract. I category is the contract. So .ts, I category .ts, that is the contract. And this is interface. So we have to use export. Why? Because we need to access outside this interface. I am defining as I category. I category is an interface. And it is using properties like name is a string type, and id as a number type. So we are using multiple values. Like this, you can create so many, you know that. Suppose we have initially these two. So this is a custom type. So we have ID and name. These are the properties. Suppose I said some like cat ID. So cat ID and name. These are the two properties in this interface. Okay, now we will go to our filter component. We will go to the filter component. In the filter component, I want to use that contract. So we want to use that contract. So we have to import the contract here. Import. So we have contracts. So we have like contracts. So it is outside. So // So we have contracts. So in the contracts, we have a file. So it is from the contracts, which location, our location is different. So // contracts, it is outside, I think. Where is the file we kept? Conditions, class demo, data binding. Acha, another // yeah, contracts. It is present two folders outside. So in that we have I category. Okay. So // to come out of the current directory. So and because for every component we have a separate folder again. So this is the current filter component folder. Outside that component folder, outside that contracts. Okay, from here we are importing I category contract. We imported that. Now after importing it, so now we are creating here button clicked event emitter is emitting, so that I category, it is emitting I category. So the new event emitter, it is emitting the I category. That means it can emit a custom type. It can configure and emit a custom type. Now on button click, we can emit multiple values because I category is a custom type. So here we are creating. So suppose I am defining button events. So button event arcs. Okay. Button event arcs. So here we are defining, or simply I will say filter event arcs. Okay. Filter event arcs is of type I category. It is of type I category. That means it is an object type. So already you know how to design a custom type. So we already learned in TypeScript how to design these custom types. Now it can have category ID. Category ID is 1. And it can have name. So name is some electronics, something like this. We can get these dynamically also. We can get these dynamically also. That means this category name, I can get that by using this dot category name. So I can get that category name. And category ID, if it is having a separate value, I can get that value. Initially, just roughly, I am defining the category ID and the category name. So these are the two properties. And this filter event arguments is an object which should be emitted on button click. On button click, we have to emit. So this dot filter event args, we have to emit that filter event args. That means on button click, it can emit an object. It is an object. It is of type I category. So it contains cat ID and name. So let's run this and see actually the filter component. I just added that filter component to our existing application. So when I open this, so here you can see. So this is the button we are having. So left side you can see a click button is there. We have to implement that event. So on click, so we need to implement that event. So temporarily I will give the button class as btn primary, something like this. Okay, and that is the button appearance we have. Okay, on button click, so we need to collect the values. So in our parent component, so this is the parent component. Here the filter is having category changed event, and filter is also having button clicked event. Filter is also having button clicked event. On button click, it has to collect send the details. That means here on filter click, so that is the function we are writing. So this function will fire up. So on button click, it should fire up on filter click. On filter click function will fire up. Into that, it has to send that event arguments. So $event. So button event arguments, the filter event arguments are sent into this filter click. And here in the component, here what we are doing, so we are collecting that, so and we are displaying. That means I will just keep an alert here temporarily to get that. And we are displaying, suppose, so ID is equal to, so we are using, so E is expecting two properties, cat ID. And in the next line, suppose I defined name is equal to, so it is expecting name. So this is the properties it is collecting. So that means now that event argument is firing up two values. We have to collect the values and we have to use these two values, the category ID and the category name. So that means when user, so here, so selects a category, so footwear, and I click on this, and you can see it gets that category ID and category name. By default, we are not sending that selected category name. Selected category name we can send, so by using another property. So we are sending category ID 1 and category name is all. So we are not sending the selected category, because to send the selected category, what we have to do is here, currently category name is all and the same category name is sent here. You can see the category name is all. Here you can see the category name is all and we are sending that category name. If you want to send the selected category name, on category change, you have to fire up that. On category change, you have to send the details. Then it can handle. Remember, on category change, you can emit multiple values. Currently, we are just sending this category name. We can send both the details. We can configure both the details. I just created a separate event and we are collecting them and using them. So by default, it is all. So it is sending that all. And if you can update this, on category change, if you can update this, so then it will send those details on. It will send those details. That means generally on category change, what you can do is you can update this dot. So here we have filter event args. It is an object. This filter event args category ID is some ID and name. This is this dot category name. That means it will update that on the change and it will send that. It depends on the event, how you want to configure and handle that. So technically, it is a custom event. And when you are selecting those events and it has to get the details and display now, you can see category ID is 1 and category name is footwear. On change, it can get that category name and it can emit that category name. So category name is electronics. So that means every event can have multiple properties also. If event is having multiple properties and we want to send all the properties, we need to send all the properties. Generally, suppose the ID, category ID, we can get the category ID. So technically we can get the category ID by using that categories collection index numbers. Their property names we can also use here dynamically so that it can get 0, 1, 2. It can update accordingly. So it depends on your requirement, how you want to configure and define. Just I showed you that an event arguments can be one value or multiple values, because generally 100 to 100% anywhere in the world, when you look at custom events, so in any tutorial or any website, anybody explaining you, so you will see always people showing you only a string type, 100% everywhere. So then many times this doubt comes, is it only the string that event can emit? So no, event can emit any kind of value. It's a generic type. It can emit any kind of value. So you will not find anywhere anybody showing you event emitter is emitting a number, event emitter is emitting a boolean, event emitter is emitting an object. You will find only every time 100 to 100%, even in the official Angular site also, you will find event emitter emitting a string. That is the reason many times that doubts regularly comes from the learner is, can it emit only a string? And sometimes some people accidentally or unknowingly, they give a definition like event emitter emits a string. That's wrong. It cannot, it's not emitting a string. It's a generic type. So if it is a generic type, it can emit any kind of value. So it can emit multiple values. So here we designed a contract. And we are accessing that and we are using that. So that means here it is going to handle different types of values. So different types of values. So this category ID, I given category ID. We can use like, suppose it's not category ID. So it is category count. Here we are defining some count is a number. The same thing we need to implement everywhere. We need to implement everywhere. That means it is expecting count. It is expecting cat count. Cat count is initially 0. So here also we are defining the cat count. So category count is initially 0. Now, whenever we are accessing this category count in our parent component, usually we can update that category count with the count we have collected. That means, so you can see here, so fashion count, all count, details are there. Now we can get those details and we can update these details here. That means here it is not expecting cat ID now, it is expecting cat count. That cat count can be updated with the values. Currently it is using this 0 value. It can be appended, you can collect that. You remember, these can be updated with the new values. That means what we are doing, E dot, we are defining. So cat count, E dot cat count is equal to, cat count is equal to, you can get a dynamic value. That means this dot, all count, or selected category name count, how many selected categories are present, you can get that count and display. So this is cat count. Suppose E dot name is equal to, so this dot category name, we can access that category name. It is sending some value by default. We can use those values or we can append the values. It's not like we have to use the same values. Every event argument can have some value. So which you can change, So which you can append, you can modify them. And you know already the contracts, how you define the contracts, how do you work with the contracts. So in contracts, you know that you can even define read-only properties. Read-only properties means some property values which you cannot change. Now I am displaying alert. So E dot cat count. Suppose I defined here count is equal to E dot cat count. And in the next line, so here name is equal to E dot. So here we defined E dot. So name, we are configuring name, right? We are defining that name. And you can see, so when I click on this, it has to get that undefined and all. So here we are selecting the category name and we are defining this. It's a count is 6 and electronics because we haven't selected all count here. So that means electronics, we can also get how many footwears are present, count. Because of course, so generally, if you can get the category name here, you can count how many categories belonging to that category name are present and you can give that count there. That means you know how do we return that value. That means we can use this dot products dot, we can use a filter and this filter can use X implies X dot. So X dot category is matching with this dot category name and get the length and display. That means we are using an expression to get the categories count and store that categories count here. That means which category user is selecting. So and click that category related count will update. That's good. That means we can send several details into this. We can update those details. That means it will get the count of electronics. So it will get the count of footwear, how many footwear are there. So it depends. That means how you defined the values configured. So if you are later adding the values, removing the values, it updates accordingly. It will update accordingly. That means a custom event can have different types of values, can have different types of values. So we can configure different types of values. So a number or an object. So mostly, so this is the correct way of, this is the most asked concept. Why? Because many times when we design events, it can have multiple properties. Event can have multiple properties. So always it is important to send multiple properties into that by using this technique. So this example, so what we have done is actually same yesterday's example, some changes we have done. We want to send the category name and the categories count as event arguments. So then what we done is first we designed a contract in this example. The same previous yesterday's example only. So first step is we are adding a new folder, contracts. So contracts into app. Into the app folder, we are adding a new folder, contracts. And we are adding a new file, add a new file into contracts. And that is, so that new file is iCategory.ts. And it is an interface. Generally, you can generate interfaces and you can configure the interfaces through commands also. Actually, through command, if you want to generate, so you can also use you can use command. You can use the command. The command will be ng generate I is for interface, or you can write interface completely. ng generate interface and interface name iCategory. So you can run this in the contracts folder. In the contracts folder, you can run this command. So it will generate a interface for you. These are commands, or you can manually add. Now once you added this, and now some changes in your files. That means we have, so filter.component.ts. In the filter component TS file, so this is the logic we need to add. I will copy that. This is the logic. All yesterday's logic is there, but here today we created a new, we first imported this contract, and we created the button click custom event. This is emitting a category type of object. So, and by default, we created an object which can handle those type of values, and we are emitting them on button click. We are emitting them. That means actually in the filter, so filter.component.html. So you need, so to present that button also. So we need just that button also. I'm just giving entire example, right? So that means this is the button, and on click, it has to call that button click which emits the value. Now in the parent component, that is products list dot component dot ts. In the products list component, so we are creating a event which can collect the event arguments, and it can use those event arguments, cat count and cat name. it is using those event arguments and displaying some value. So this is the products list component TS file, which is adding some options. And in the products list.component.html. So here we have to access that component, filter component, and the event button clicked is the custom event. This custom event is sending the event arguments through the $event. $event is used to send the event arguments, and we are configuring them and using them. So this is the basic approach of how do we configure and use this. This is another just same example. Yeah, this is another same example. This is another same example, which is handling multiple properties, custom event, right? So when you define event, and remember now actually in our component, so a component can have multiple events, and a component can send multiple properties as event arguments. So our filter component is having two events, category changed event, button clicked event. And category changed event is emitting a string, only one value it is emitting, one property it is emitting. And this is emitting an object. And usually event is an object with all the properties configured and defined so that we can access and we can use those event arguments, right? So that is generally how we can define the custom events. So input, output, and how we can use event emitter, right? These are the options. So that is custom events. How do we deal with the custom events? Next, important after understanding how to create our own events and configure the events. So now in the components, we need to know about component life cycle. We need to understand about the component life cycle. People call as component life cycle hooks. Component life cycle hooks. That means how do we configure the component? Actually, every component, so we have several phases. When component starts, from component start to component end, component has to undergo several phases. And a developer should know how to utilize those phases, where to write those particular functionalities. That means when to write input, when to write output, in which phase you have to configure. So this is where the performance related issues will come. If a component is not performing certain functionalities at the certain phase, so then the performance issues will come. So a developer should know what are the phases of component. So in how many phases the component completes its functionality, starting the component to ending the component. What are the various phases? And when to write these phases. For example, so we have written everything in a general class like this. Everything in a general class like this. That means we created a filter component. But in real world development process, it's very important to tell when the initialization should happen. You should tell when the events should fire up. That means you cannot put everything at one phase. So you have to define the initializations in one phase, the custom events in another phase, and the event value rendering in another phase, method executions in another phase. This will allow the component to perform its tasks correctly as per the situation. It can handle that, right? Technically, so technically you can handle all these various phases by using a component cycle. You can handle all these phases by using a component cycle. So every component that you designed have a lot of phases. If you remembered, so we removed that phase when we created a component. When we created a component, by default, it gets on init. So that means on initialization, on rendering, what are the options. This is where you will learn like what is change detection. Already I told you change detection means. We learn like content projection. What is content projection? These are very important things in the interviews. Usually you will find this regularly in interviews. A change detection, content projection, why they need, how they actually work. So with this, we can finish the component part. Then we can go into pipes, services, how to handle them. That we will see in our next session. Tomorrow we will discuss about component lifecycle, right? So don't miss this topic. This is very important topic, right? And here you will handle a lot of questions related to interviews. That is the reason you need to be perfect in this. We will start this in a new session, understanding the life cycle hooks, right? Tomorrow we will discuss about that. Huh?